Thank you all for coming. We're absolutely delighted that you're here. And we're delighted to welcome Mr. Anthony Murphy and Mr. Manchán Magan.
That's what you call a full house. Good afternoon. It is afternoon, isn't it? I'm still on Boyne Valley time. I apologise. You're all very welcome. So just by way of introduction, this is a Mythical Ireland podcast. My name's Anthony Murphy. I run the website mythicalireland.com. I am very, very honoured and delighted to welcome a very special guest to the podcast, and that is Manchán Magan. Manchán probably needs no introduction. But just in case you're wondering who he is a very well-known author and broadcaster and a fabulous ambassador for the Irish language and for Irish culture in general. Manchán, you and I did a remote conversation in 2020 during the lockdowns, which was brilliant and very enjoyable, but it's much better in the flesh. Anyway, just to say before we start that this event is being recorded. You'll see several cameras around about the place. The video of this event, if you want to rewatch it or recommend it to your friends afterwards, or tell them definitely not to watch it, depending on your reaction, it will be on the Mythical Ireland social media in a couple of weeks' time. There's also an RTE crew here. They're doing some work with Manchán on a longer term project. If it was a thing that you had any difficulty with appearing on film, just have a word with one of the production crew afterwards. Is that okay? So we'll get kicked off. We have absolutely no script at all. None. We haven't discussed this beforehand. I have no prepared questions. This is going to be a free-flowing conversation. So probably the best way to start is to talk about the theme of this event, this Samhain event in Clonakilty, is Listen to the Land Speak, which of course is the name of one of your books. Okay, how do we listen to the land speak? Why should we listen to the land speak? And how does the land speak?
So,
That's three questions.
yeah, exactly. Like, first, isn't there's something bigger than those questions going on? It seems that people are feeling this need or this urge or this want to listen to the land speak. And that, I don't think, happened 10 years ago. So the reason that we're all gathered in this room wanting to know this, the reason we're going to be parading through Clonakilty with this theme of listening to the land speak, is there's something rising in all of us. And all of us have a sense of that. Either we want to connect, so many of us, should I say, want to connect to either our language or our culture or the stories or the land itself, to even if it's just planting a kale in the garden. And I am one of those people who are trying to come to terms with this urging in myself, and you are in yourself, and so many others are. So none of us have the answers yet, and yet all of us are blindly feeling. We're feeling we would like to be more connected to something bigger, to something grander than ourselves. And I don't think it's coming from our brain. I don't know where it's coming from, the ground or from our soul or from our heart. But the beautiful thing is none of us are leading it. This isn't an egotistical, this isn't an RT campaign or a Netflix campaign. It's something that's coming. And most of us are getting it wrong. At least me, I'm getting it wrong the whole time. I'm thinking, what does it mean to listen to the lands? What does it mean to address the chasm inside of me? This sort of brokenness, this sense of looking around Ireland in the 80s and 90s and thinking, I feel isolated, but I know Ireland was once a rooted place, and how do I connect? And sometimes I'm doing it in really awkward ways, by either going down weird, like the wrong things, either the Irish language or some element of, I don't know, looking, I still don't know the answers, but I know there's an urge among so many of us to try and find a way of, as one way of phrasing it, listen to the land speak.
Yeah, I'm very conscious of the fact that I was born and reared in Drogheda, and Drogheda is a town in the Pale, and it's something that if you're not educated a certain way, so I mean, for instance, I wouldn't be able to speak Irish fluently, which is something I regret. We spoke about that before. In Drogheda, we're very conscious of our Norman history, walled town, British military fortifications, and of course the ecclesiastical, the church history, And I feel in the past decade or two, particularly the last decade, it's like Drogheda now is trying to break out of those old Norman fortifications, you know. I left school and we were told that the Mill Mount, which is this big Martello tower on a mound on the highest part of Drogheda, if you've ever been to Drogheda, you'll have seen it. I grew up, and when I left school, as far as I was concerned, that was built by the Normans, and then it was fortified by the English, because they had an army garrison based there. What I didn't know until I was about 20 was that there was mythology and folklore attached with that mound, saying that it's much older than all of that, you know. And now, in the past decade, we've had archaeologists looking for evidence that it might be, and I think they're fairly convinced that it is. So there's that. And then there's, for instance, coming down the road today, we travelled from Drogheda today, I passed through about 8 counties: Louth, Meath, Dublin, Kildare, Laois, Kilkenny, Tipperary, Cork. Yeah, that's 8, isn't it? Oh, I apologise to the Limerick folk. We may have passed through maybe 500 metres of Limerick. I do apologise, yes. And you're aware of course, when you're on a motorway, you don't see Ireland. You just see mountains, you just see general landscapes. It's only when you go on the back roads, you know. But you still get that sense that if you've been raised I get that sense, if you've been raised in a particular place, you may not be connected to the land in the way that you should be. And I agree with you that it's not a heady thing, it's more of a heart thing, you know. But why is that happening? Why is it happening now? Has it got something to do with, you know, post-colonialism? Is it something to do with the church, you know, the interest in the church falling away? Is that part of it?
And like, so the people who are listening to the Mythological Ireland podcast know who Anthony is. But like, for some of the room, like Anthony was someone who just started talking, my sense of you, my history of you, you started talking in your room at home on YouTube about this interest that you were having, I don't know, a decade ago, that sort of time. And you just got these followers. So it was for you, it was just suddenly you felt that urge inside of you, and you probably had like loads of different interests before, but there was this rising up in you, and you start talking, and you now have like 150,000 followers in different social media. So we're all part of this movement. And how is it happening? I don't know. I feel, and again, I have no proof of this, I feel there's some type of rising of, one way of describing it is feminine energy, like a connection to land. And in so many cultures, and again, the word indigenous is a really complicated word, but cultures who are linked to a certain place for a long time, everything was dependent on the land. The land gave of itself. Every year gave all its like I've just come back from doing ceremonies with different Native American people, and it was the men and the life givers. Men and life givers was how they describe people in ritual. So the earth is a life giver, and that energy of life giving, you know, so the women were called life givers, was focused. And we know we're waking up from 2,000 years of patriarchy, longer, probably 3,000 or 4,000 years of patriarchy. And everything is shifting. We know everything about our world is men dominating, making a linear idea. And somehow that's coming to a shift. And realizing, actually, it's not about men manipulating the world. It's about what the soil, what nature wants to do. And we're just a humble part of that. And so I think what's happening is that. And I think that's why it's really awkward for all of us, or for me specifically. I don't know how to express these things. I'm a product of, I was born in 1970. I'm a product of a small-minded, Catholic, patriarchal, misogynistic world. And some of my thought conditioning is so full of that. I was educated by Jesuits. So we all, in some way, we all had either some element of the priests or education or just a limited thinking of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s in our minds. And something is rising. And it's really hard to put a word on it. But we can see it. You can see it every day in your followers. I can see it in the young people in their 20s who are contacting me on Instagram. They would, like teens, who, when we were in school, there wasn't a load of people in the schoolyard talking about myth, talking about Irish language. It's not irrational, but it's beautiful.
No, they were talking about Peg and how they hated it. Yeah. But it's very interesting, all of that, because, you know, that even that awareness, you know. But is there something special about Ireland in that regard, in the way that the land speaks to us? I mean, for instance, if you look at the number of creative, artistic, Nobel laureates, etc., you know, the number of songwriters and sculptors and musicians and writers, etc., you know, everything from Samuel Beckett to Bono, you know, it would seem that there's a disproportionate amount of people who are sort of inspired by just being present in this landscape. So is there something peculiar about Ireland? Is it the bedrock? Is it the fact that it's an island? Is it the fact that, the weather's poxy half the time? I don't know, Because now you've travelled. I know this because I was introduced to you through the George Hook programme. I used to hear you talking about your adventures all around the world. You say, God, that guy's been everywhere. So you would be more aware of it than a lot of people. When you come back here, is there an extra energy emerging from the landscape somehow here?
And so, like, Anthony Murphy is very interesting because he looks very straight-laced and he's, he rational when you hear him on YouTube. But he asks the hippiest questions. Like, his mind is hippier than anyone. Like, yesterday we had Billy Maughlin, who does pagan rave. He can be out there, wild man. Anthony's straight, and you're asking the right question for. Well, I was going to say West Cork, but then Mighty out in Beara says to me, and he says, them in Clonakilty, they think they're in West Cork. Like, they don't even know West Cork. Mighty is a legend out in Allihies in Beara. But, yes. So, first, I think there's nothing exceptional about the Irish language, our Irish mythology, our Irish land. We can't go for exceptionality. But something beautiful happened with Ireland. On the edges of Europe, we kept a lot of our old connection with native ways. And again, I was saying that word, the reason I don't feel comfortable saying indigenous Ireland, indigenous means you were a colonised force who were rooted to land for thousands of years and you're still being controlled. Our ancestors, whether we think it was good or not, 100 years ago, sacrificed themselves. They got killed, they got blood, they got punched in the face, they created a civil war, they created a tragedy to give us liberation. We are now free, we're sovereign, we're independent, and yet we are still allowing all our rivers be polluted, particularly in Munster in the last 20 years, where dairy farming hadn't become so intensive. We are still killing our land. So as long as we allow the government remain in power, a government that's killing our land, we can't dare to call ourselves indigenous. We can hope to try and get back to this indigeneity that our ancestors had not long ago, that often our grandparents, definitely our great-grandparents had. So we did, because we escaped rationalism or rationalization or the Reformation and the Renaissance and the industrialization, we remained surprisingly connected with, we wouldn't say Neolithic, but Bronze Age and definitely early Middle Age or Iron Age ways of thought. And that was a way that believed of the goddess, that the land was a goddess. The land was alive and gave forth of her bounty every harvest, and then went at Samhain underneath the horizon and died, went to the sun, went back to the darkness. So we were a people who were rooted to the land, and because, as I say, the modern influences from the 16th century on didn't really impact us and make our mind small, didn't limit the parameters of our imagination and our potential to see other realms until, you could say, electricity came in the 40s or 50s, or, you can choose a time for it. I mean, clearly Dublin was a modern place in the 1870s, in the 1790s it was. But in general, yes, we kept a connection to land. So I think that's what makes Ireland exceptional, is we kept the fairies alive. And I said, I'm just back. I do this tour of Arán Agazim. I did it on the East Coast for about 7 weeks, the East Coast of North America last year, just back a week ago from the West Coast. And I go into any room there and I can talk to, and they're all Irish people who are married to Koreans, Ukrainians, Finnish, Russians. And in any of that room, I can ask them about a fairy tradition, and they will know it. We're a people who've kept the connection with the other world. And it's so interesting, like today, Samhain, Halloween, this worldwide celebrated festival about connecting with the other world. And where does it come from? Tagan Shell Nácha comes from Ireland. So yes, we've managed to keep something special. And so when I go to these places, in the last few years, I'm being humbled by these elders taking time off to meet me. And the reason they meet me is because they say, these are indigenous people in Australia, in Canada, and the States, and they say, they identify something in Ireland. And I say, well, I just say, oh no, we're not indigenous, we're ruining our land. And they say, you need to fucking get over yourselves. You have connected to the land, your language, your myth is still strong, but you're also white. You're also incredibly wealthy at the moment. And as we know, the government, the next 3 years, we're going to, because of the Silicon Valley money and the pharmaceutical money, we have a seat on the EU, we have a seat sometimes on the UN, and we have this otherworldly connection to land. So there's an enormous responsibility coming with our connection to spirit.
So just to play devil's advocate to some of what you've been saying, Manchán, I could level the charge at you that you're advocating some sort of political anarchy, first of all, and secondly, that you're calling for the rise of some sort of new spiritual movement.
Well, I think it's happening, and I'm not asking to be a guru or anything, but I just see in the Instagram all these people who are who are interested in all these things who weren't interested, I think, a decade ago. So I think I am seeing that the potential, and again, I am so blinded. I'm from my own perspective, from all of these people who, I see in my world who are interested in these things who I believe weren't, and I wasn't in the past. So I'm just thinking that I think there might be a spiritual rising happening.
Yeah, what I suppose, just to counterbalance that too, is what I'm conscious of in all of this, and you, by the way, that was very accurate what you said about how Mythical Ireland started off. It started off as me expressing these things, and then just people going, yeah, we like this stuff, and suddenly there's a growth and there's an organic thing happening, But I'd be kind of aware of is being very careful about, that first of all, we started off, let's talk about the 20th century for a second. We were pagan Christians in a way, but a lot of the stuff was suppressed. And now it's coming to the fore. What I wouldn't want to happen is for us to start thinking that there's some, like you mentioned this, some form of Irish exceptionalism, that we start to become insular in our thinking. Because if there's one thing that we can say about the Irish is that we have always been international in our outlook. We have always, if you look at our stories are, Laura Gawala, the book of the takings of Ireland, just comings and goings. The coming into the world, the coming into Ireland of the outer world, and the welcoming of that quite often, like when Amergin, on behalf of the Milesians, encounters Eru at Ishnok. And without him saying a word, she says, "Oh, your coming here has long been foretold, and you're going to be very successful in your exploits. In other words, you're going to beat the Tuatha Dé Danann." She was telling him before he even told her what his mission was. So we're very conscious of that outward looking. And
I missed that. Who said that to Amergin?
Eru.
Oh yeah,
yeah. The goddess after whom Ireland is named, and it wasn't in her interests to predict victory for him. But I suppose what I'm getting
Anthony is he's done so much research. To check out his website, he's read all those things. I'm a journalist, so I skirt over the ones he knows. There's so much that he's going into those stories. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, go on. I'm not paying him to say any of that. You're not getting any extra for that. But I was kind of, and it's something that I'm constantly aware of in my own work. When I write, when I live stream, when I put anything on social media, is not to arouse this feeling that is so easy to come up against, which is a form of nationalism. It's putting a green flag or something around you and saying, I'm Irish and this is me, and in a way becoming negative about that in your worldview, in a way thinking that this is something exceptional. I just know that in my work I have encountered the magic that you talk about in your work, the magic of listening to the land speak, the magic of the place names. Every field in Ireland had a name. We have field name studies published in Louth and Meath, which are fabulously rich and comprehensive books. And I happen to know the people who worked on them, and they say, we had to leave a load of stuff out because the thing was 400 pages, it was going to cost a fortune to get done. This thing. I am just conscious of that we don't, suddenly become this. Well, it was in the 20th century, everybody everywhere was talking about classical mythology. Everybody was talking about Homer and Virgil. Everybody was talking about Odysseus and Hercules and all that. Now they're going to be talking about, I wouldn't want it to be that sort of saber-rattling, sort of nationalistic thing. Am I being too careful?
No, you're so right. So, the first book that got my attention was this 32 Words for Field about the language. The next book, 2 years ago, Listen to Land Speak about the land. The books after this they were published by Gill, and Gill I've often said this. Guild said that book about the language was going to sell 5,000 copies. And now Guild Books are the main publisher in Ireland. They know their market better than anyone else. And what, it sold 95,000 copies. And they know it would have sold. They said, give it 2 years, over the 2 years, it'll sell 5,000. It'll make the money back on it. You'll get your advance back. And it sold 95,000. That's because something was rising above, wasn't it? So anyway, that's the first book. The second book. Now Guild don't see the next step. So I'll be self-publishing the books. Next step is this time next year, a book about Ireland and Vedic connections, Ireland and India connections. Now that's a fraught topic because of what Hitler did with Aryanism. So I'll be treading carefully with that. Then the book after that is Ireland and Aboriginal connections, and then Ireland and Native American connections. Right. It's not saying there's any deep connection, but it's tracking the similarities, the common ideas. Because what's going to happen one way or the other, because of climate change, there's going to be mass migration, mass refugee, mass people going. So the minute everyone realizes the whole world in the past was about people moving, or the whole of history, as you say, Lower Goyle is just about movement of people. And the one thing, like West Cork, as we know, has led the charge of new energy, the arrival of new energy, new thinking in terms of land connection, in terms of permaculture, in terms of organic, in terms of drumming, in terms of 5 rhythms dance, in terms of anything, people connecting to the body and the land in the bigger picture from the late 60s on. And it was migrants coming into Ireland. It was Germans, it was English, it was people often, fearing the nuclear bomb, bringing their crafts to Ireland and bringing new thinking. And because Cork, West Cork, the coastal, this is very simplistic, but could we say because of smuggling, they've always been open to other people coming and, smuggling trade in. So they opened the Cork. And we know the stories, it's great at RTE Online, the same hippies and New Agers and craft and artists tried to get to Mayo. And there was groups closed them out of it. And the church came down and closed them out. West Cork, because it was open, because it was a coastal place, isn't it no surprise that that's where Amergin comes, that's where, Cork-Kerry border. The southwest is where we come. And the one thing I wanted to mention there about the other thing about that, so it's all about us realizing we're not exceptional, we are connected. The other thing, it's so beautiful you bring in Eru. So Amergin, according to, as you said, the mythic, the creation myth of Ireland is Amergin, this druid or poet, summons Ireland into being. And the beautiful, and that was what I used to say in my little show, Rana Gazim, and so many, but of course it's a man. Of course a man is going to say a male poet comes and summons up. So you're saying a man comes and summons up the goddess? No. So, have I forgotten her name now? The poet who's married to Theo Dorgan, Paula Meehan, yeah. So Paula whispers into Theo Dorgan's ear, I'm sure this is all right about Amergin. It's great the way poets all focus on Amergin, but, the two Hidanan were here before, and who were the two Hidanan? And they were semi-divine human beings, but the goddesses, they were all Eru, Banba, Fola. There were strong gods in it too, but it was goddesses are the one of the great stories about. So Paula says to Theo, surely there was, a grad Amergin comes and brings the white people, the Milesian, the people from Spain, us, to Ireland. But there were people here before him, the Tuatha and the poets. And he said, surely one of their goddesses, and Eru was known as a great a poet as well as everything else. So she whispers this to Theo. And then last year in Kilkenny Arts Centre, he writes this poem with Columachanumra to music about how Eru would have summoned the world into being. And then you just look at Wikipedia to see what do we know about Eru, as you said, named after Ireland. The Vikings came, it was Eire, and then they add apostrophe S and land, Ireland, Eru's land. So Eru, Eru is a word, it's a word for abundance, for fertility, for pregnancy. So it's just a land. And she was fostered, and again, any indigenous culture you come across, fosterage is a key element for many social reasons. Eru was fostered by cuddle the round-breasted. What does cuddle mean? Again, that's just in a Wikipedia, the first line of a Wikipedia entry. Like the information is just out there. It's always been out there for us. Cuddle the round-breasted. Cuddle in Irish means cuttlefish, or skin changer. You know the one thing about the cuttlefish, he can change his skin to any kind. So we have cuddle the round-breasted, the shapeshifter, the skin changer, the shapeshifter, nourishes Eru. And so, shapeshifter is someone that if you're having a story in any mythological culture about the beginnings of land, it is someone becomes human. Someone changed shape. A spirit changes shape, becomes human. So if Cuddle nourishes Eru, and he brings her to Bean Huddle, the hill of Cuddle, the hill of the shapeshifter. And as he feeds her, it says the mountain rises up so high that the sun is in danger of burning her skin and the wind blows through her ears. It rises up to the sun, as high as the sun, the mountain does. Now, we know geologically Ireland was once as high as Everest. It was in a different position to where it was now, and it was as high as Everest, which is a lovely mirroring of geological story and mythological story. But we're at a time where we're beginning to, all our myths, and you said exactly, myths are dangerous. And with the myths we learn in school and that we give to tourists now on guided coaches are the myths that the Gaelic League, that the likes of the O'Rahilly, my great-granduncle and others, formed in the 1890s and 1910s. And there was an agenda behind those myths. They were all about warriors, about Cuchulainn and Finn McCool, because we needed male warriors because we were going to start fighting a big empire. So we needed these heroes who were going to go up. And they served their purpose. And they did a great thing for us. And they instilled tragedy and violence in Northern Ireland and a violence in ourselves. But they got us to where we are now. We are actually free to make our own decisions, where we weren't before those myths were created. But I think what's vital is those myths are going to be and a myth is open to being reshaped at every time, reinterpreted. And there's going to be a new generation. And I think it's going to be women in their 20s and 30s are going to find a new way of telling our stories. And they will be more expansive, and they won't be focused just on men who can kill loads of people on the battlefield. And the only time that a woman gets into the story is if she does the same. Queen Maeve, battle-hungry warrior, or even like a modern version, the Pirate Queen. You know, it's all about these women who are basically Thatcher, who are basically men in disguise. I think we're going to see these stories are about nourishing and about connection. But I know I am too stuck in the old mind frame, the 1970s mind frame, to do that work properly.
Well, this is part of what's perhaps happening in the sort of groundswell that's going on, is that we're disentangling stuff. For instance, you know, we may not realise it overtly, or we may not have accepted it, but as I said, and I mentioned it previously, but we were for centuries on this island, we were pagan Christians. We hadn't given up our old ways. They were incorporated by the early church. That much is accepted by scholars, that a particular brand of Christianity arose in Ireland. And this whole thing that you see in mythology of right-hand wise, walking right-hand wise around something holy like the Well of Segish or Nectan's Well, and not Widdershins or Tuathal, you know, Jeshel rather than Tuathal. And this idea of if you go, and then you think of just simple things like country, rural patterns in cemeteries, you know, and the prescribed route around the cemetery, and even climbing Croagh Patrick and walking around the cairn 3 times Jeshel and all of that stuff, that we'd never given up on that. There's so much to unpack from what you've just said. First of all, just to put it on record, I have 9 books, and in total, they haven't sold half of what one of your books has sold. So hats off, and brilliant stuff. So the goddess is extremely important to all of this, it seems. It seems as if part of the wound that is healing or being healed is related to the suppression of that. That's what it feels like to me. It feels as if the feminine aspect in particular is finally starting to get a little bit of room to breathe again, having been sort of pushed down under for so long.
Doesn't it feel odd, 2 men talking about this on stage? But it's where we are. We acknowledge it, and
yeah, it's something that I'm very conscious of, and we were chatting about it backstage about our white male privilege, and it's just something that you just need to be constantly aware of in anything that you say, that sometimes you've said something and then afterwards you realise, well, that's a very particular perspective you've taken on that, Anthony, you know. I am very interested in the feminine characters, is probably not a good word, but the goddesses in particular. Bowen is a goddess that fascinates me, the goddess of the Boyne, because she was famous for 2 things. She had an illicit affair with the sun god, and then she went to wash her sins at the well and got drowned. Her fame is all negative. It's all, it feels like, actually what it feels like is church shame. That's what it feels like. And actually, if you delve into her story, you find a very powerful sort of early feminist icon, you know? The one who said, well, no, I'm not going to be put in a box by the men, and I'm not going to be restricted from, you know? And I think it was the monks that made her go to the well to wash herself of her shame. The real reason she went to the well was, first of all, to give the 2 fingers to the men, and second of all, to make a trial of its power. The Ingenicus is very clear about that. It's not to do with washing the shame of her sin because you had an illicit affair. And I mean, it's something that we do tours of the mythological murals in Drogheda, and my fellow storyteller there, Gráinne Rafferty, has raised this. And of course, from a woman's perspective, it's fascinating. It's not that I didn't think about it, it's just it was proper for her to voice it rather than me. You know, when Dagda and Bowen conceived the child Aengus Og at Newgrange, what happened? Elkmar, who is Bowen's husband, comes back.
Well, go slowly over this because it's all new to me and to some of you know
Oh,
it all.
right.
Tell
I'll
us
do my
about
best,
Dagda. Yeah, go
and
on.
I'll give you the shortest version of it possible. Bowen, who's the goddess of the River Boyne, was married to Elkmar. Elkmar, depending on which myth you read, Elkmar is the guy who owns Newgrange. He lives in there. But if you read other myths, they'll say Dagda owns it and built it. Elkmar owned Newgrange, and Bowen is his wife. Dagda falls in love with Bowen, makes Elkmar go away.
And Dagda's the god of good things, or the supreme god of the two did on? Is that fair?
He's a sun deity, plus he's Roessa, the god of all knowledge. Yeah, so he's associated with knowledge, but he's also definitely a sun deity, control the weather and the harvest and red-eyed and all of that stuff. So he sends Elkmar away. Elkmar thinks he's going on a day's shopping trip up to Banbridge. As I always joke, he's going up to the north. But really what happens is when he goes away, Dagda interferes with time, so it stretches out into 9 months. Just enough time for Dagda and Bowen to, lie together. And so Aengus is born, and when Elkmar returns, what happens? Out of a mixture of fear of her husband and shame, she abandons the child. And the child is fostered by Major at Briley in Ardagh Hill in Longford for 9 years. And it was Gráinne that sort of brought that whole conversation in. It's like, and she was just like, sort of saying it half jokingly but half seriously, like, wow, imagine having to hide away a baby out of shame, And isn't that just literally like centuries of history right there? It's centuries of wound and pain in Ireland, So I would say maybe it's absolutely no surprise that suddenly there's this groundswell of interest in these things, Am I wrong?
No, are you writing about this? Because as I said, you've read more of the myths than I have, and it is weird that it's weird and slightly wrong that it's us men who are exploring this at the moment. But I'd hope that within a few years I'll be shutting the hell up and there'll be other people doing it. I think we're okay to keep doing this, but for the moment. But are you writing about these things? You're real, and as you said, it was Geraldine who told you, but. I'm worried about that's a really interesting perspective, and I'm worried about these things getting lost because each new insight is a step forward. They're in your books, are they? Or you talk about them on your podcast? Anyway.
I don't talk about that specific aspect of it, but what I wanted to do with Bowen was I felt that if you read, especially the introduction to it, it's not a big book, but there's no book about Bowen. First of all, I wanted to redress that. And actually, if you produced a list of 20 or 30 Irish goddesses, you'll find there's very few books about any of them. There's a lot of stuff about Bridget, of course, but I just thought Bowen's story had gotten confused and muddled and, obfuscated, actually, is probably the best word, Yeah. So I wanted to, first of all, put her back into the consciousness, but in a way that didn't involve this sort of religious baggage.
I know. And
this baggage of shame. So if you read the introduction says, Bowen is famous for 2 reasons, and I've outlined those reasons. Mm-hmm. But let's look at the story and let's give her a chance to speak for herself, and whatever that is. But I agree with you totally that it, to a degree, that does feel odd to be a man talking about that.
But that said, I'd still love to talk about it. So, and isn't it those 2 women who are on the story archaeology podcast and their website, they've done amazing work on Shannon and the goddess of Shunna, and realizing that a similar story to you. So Shannon was just a bold, cussed, naughty girl who went to look for enlightenment and wisdom, and so the men in the story say she was drowned or she. But the beautiful thing is, I told that story once, and they said, no, both the Boyne became the Boyne River, Shannon become the Shannon River. They didn't disappear, and the women, the knowledge of the, this morning we heard about the wells of West Cork. So, Cork. Cork have more holy wells than anywhere. Cork, Ireland has more holy wells, sacred wells, than anywhere in the world. Because that goddess knowledge was kept alive. And I said, when I go to Aboriginal cultures and they bring me to the water holes and how they are sacred, and how in Aboriginal culture they would start, everything is the water. Because every tree, every rock, the rocks were formed by the water. The trees, every plant is nourished by the water. So there's a thing that we think of the land. It's not about the land, it's the water. The water nourishes the land. The water is actually the goddess. And so, by beautiful coincidence, how every single Irish river has a female name, except Unsulan, Toulon in Cork, and maybe the one up in Derry. And so many of them are goddesses, from Boyne, from Shannon, from Etna, from Anya, from Banba, from the Bandon. So they are, so it's all about the water being alive and being the goddess. And so, the story archaeology, these two great women they're just they're historians. They know their stuff, but they're doing amazing work on bringing that back. And for me, Boyne was so, and we could move on to Tlachta, which I didn't know anything about either. Another woman that people don't know about. But Boyne, when I realised that idea, the main thing about Boyne, Boinda, which is white cow, isn't it, like Finn is Finn? And I don't know, do you think it's too much of a stretch, that stretch? So Finn McCool, fair-haired Finn, or white or fair, Fionn. But then if Fionn also actually means transparent, it's white, it's clear, it's being able to see through the veil to access the other knowledge, which is exactly what Samhain is about. It's about the tarshach, the threshold time, the veil, the knowledge comes through. So if it's Bowen, the cow who can access knowledge on the other side. If Finn McCool is the man, it's not just that he has fair hair, he's the man who can access the wisdom on the other side. So Boinda, the goddess, who nourishes her, the Boinda goddess nourishes her people with her life-giving milk. Is represented in physical form by the Boyne River, who nourishes its people with life-giving water, the people on both sides of it in Louth and Meath and Kildare. And then Boinda is the same name linguistically as Govinda, the god, the form of Krishna in India, Govinda. What does go mean? Go is bow. And when I was in Clonakilty doing my Aranagazim upstairs above the olive tree, I was talking about this 5 years ago now, Govinda, go means bow. Bow is the Irish for cow, go or gao is the Sanskrit for cow. Vinda means finder or seeker of knowledge. So in India, we have Govinda, the cow who's the finder or seeker of knowledge, Boinda, the cow who can access knowledge. The same god. But why would we in Ireland have the same god they have over there in India? If we say we came from Spain or we came by boat as Amagan, because of course this idea, it's all about migration. People have always moved. We learned our farming techniques. We learned how to grow grain 4,000 years ago. We learned how to tend cattle 5,000 years ago, where Eastern Europe meets with Western Asia. We brought that knowledge with us. We brought an Indo-European language with us. We brought an Indo-European culture with us. So I think the more we get into our mythology, the less we see we're exceptional, and the more we realise we are rooted to everything.
Yeah, I'd go with that, absolutely. I do think there's something exceptional about the landscape of Ireland. And the reason, by the way, we have more sacred wells than any other country in the world is because it falls from the sky every day. But it's very interesting.
No, I'm saying sacred wells. I'm not saying wells. There are loads of domestic wells that aren't sacred in Ireland. It's very important to say this.
Fair enough.
And I should have finished that point. The reason that we have sacred wells, it's what you said, this pagan Christianity. It's hard to prove, but I think, and again, there'll be people better said this, there was women who kept a women's knowledge, who kept knowledge of Aoi Nagat, who kept knowledge of the sacred places. The wells were places where women gathered on a Sunday. They were the places. So the patriarchy, the Roman Church controlled us, and the kings and queens. But the goddess, I think there was this underworld of women spiritual keepers, and they met at the wells, and they kept them sacred. And they kept some wells that were just for washing your feet, and some that were sacred. And I think that might be why this rising is up again.
Yeah, is that some sort of precursor to the Seroptimists or something like that?
What does that mean?
I think the Seroptimists I heard once described as a secretive underground women's movement. I think that was a sarcasm.
What are they? Is that corrupt?
I don't actually know.
All right.
It's a secret because I'm a man. But returning to the thing about the white and the transparent, so one of the aspects of Finn that is sort of restated, especially by I'm not sure it's a Raleigh or whether it's Dahi or Hogan, it's one or other or both, was the idea that it was associated with wisdom, a wisdom cult, you know, that the Finn thing, the boy eating the salmon, that happens, of course, despite what you may have heard claimed by other counties, that happened in Meath in the Boyne Valley. Fiach's Pool is underneath Nouth, actually, at Rossnaree. But the idea of not just transparency, but right, fair-haired, right? He's called Finn because he was fair-haired. His original name was Jevna, which means
Jevna, I don't know.
certainty.
Oh, Dinah, yeah, exactly. Like Diarmid O'Divinan saying. Go on.
My impression of that
Dinah.
is it's because he was certain to become a great warrior and hero and cult figure. That was his destiny, in other words, because if you look at the very short story that is Finn and the Salmon of Knowledge, you find that Finnegas is the one who's waiting for the fish. He's the one who's going to eat it. And the boy basically usurps that accidentally. And he realises, instead of chastising the boy, Finnegas bestows him with this name. What did you say your name was? Jevna. No, you are the Finn. The Finn, he calls him. And I suspect that the Finn is as much to do with brightness. Do you ever hear a parent saying, he's a bright fella, or she's a bright girl? Brightness as in not just intellectual knowledge, but that sort of wisdom, you know, wisdom beyond your years. And it was often, I think, it's said by more than one scholar that, you know, Finn's hair can be seen as silvery as much as it can as blonde hair. The silver, the grey, representing that wisdom, that advanced wisdom beyond his years, you know.
And that brightness gets us back to the goddesses, to Grania or Anya. So Anya means brilliance, means brightness, you know, and Anya is the goddess of Munster. And as I talk about and listen to Land speak, how her body is embodied, her corpse is embodied in the landscape, just like you might find in Africa among a native tribe, or South America. We, you know, the place names, as you say, tell where the body of Anya, the embodied goddess, is there. And Anya means brightness. It's the sun, the warmth coming from the south. Grania means the grain on groin, or it means some to a grian, or it's Anya. It's either the sun, the brightness, or the grain, and the grain is only brought to life by the sun and by the brightness. There's something going on. It's all back to either the water's making the land come alive, and then the sun. And that's why you go to any native culture and they'll have the same things, the sun and the land.
Well, this is part of the reason that I believe that some of the Tuatha Dé Danann mythology originates in the Neolithic, when farming comes to Ireland. Because, you know, before the arrival of that people, who, by the way, originated in modern day, what we would call Anatolia in Turkey, or what you might have called Asia Minor if you were educated, when I was educated. So they arrived, they brought cattle, and they brought, you know, crop husbandry. We didn't do that until they arrived. And when we started doing that, we realised, hey, we could do a certain amount of work at certain times of the year. We can reap a big harvest. And if we can store it and we can keep animals, we've got lots of food. And we can build monuments. Brilliant. That's why Newgrange was built. But what was the point of that? Sorry, there was a point to this, which is that I suspect that aspect of Irish mythology involving cows and bulls and anything to do with crops arises from the fact that it was in the Neolithic that the origins of those myths arrived onto this island.
And so I'd love your expansion of this. So, like, now there's great work being done by this Dr. Tyrone Bowes into DNA and surnames up in Galway. And so, you know, it's handy if one gets one's DNA done by one of those American DNA companies and then looks through, I think it's Irish Origins or something, he's finding a lot of us, and particularly in West Cork, you'd find a lot of people, like my DNA, I have the DNA of those people 4,500 years ago. In other words, the Bronze Age settlers. Now, and, you know, the DNA studies that we're seeing minimal Neolithic DNA within us, aren't they? So the point we need to make is Newgrange and Nouth and Down weren't built by us. Either they died out or we killed them, one way or the other. And then the people who came before those, just very loosely, were the hunter-gatherers who arrived 10,000 years ago as the ice sheet was flooding, as the water was washing away, as Town Cliana, the great wave of Glandore Harbour, was being created. So how do we marry those two things in the fact that there are, vaguely you could say, three big settlers? The hunter-gatherers, who were, and the first time you and I came in contact was because that TV series I did, DNA Cailte, was those hunter-gatherers had blue eyes, bright blue eyes, and dark brown skin. It's a genotype that doesn't exist in the world anymore. They were the people. And they came, as you said, roughly from that area, from where Asia and the Middle East, basically from the Rift Valley, where life came out of Africa and settled. Then the Neolithic people come, and they look like people in modern Sardinia. They're brown-skinned and browny, greeny, blue-eyed. They're light brown skin, not like the hunter-gatherers. And then us, you could say the Milesians came. So if the DNA is saying that there were 3 separate groups, how did and yet the myth is also showing stories that we may have information back to the glacial age. Yeah. How did that happen? How did we bridge that divide? Is that clear what I'm saying? Yeah, the humans settlement isn't continuous in Ireland, and yet we're looking in the mythology and it looks like some of the myths was passed on.
This is a very brilliant question, and it addresses a lot of the stuff that's become. Just before you do that, can I just do a quick trivia test? Just shout out an answer. What percentage of the world's population do you think has blue eyes?
5.
So I've 20 and 35 and 5. I always thought the majority of the world's population had blue eyes. I was shocked to find out it's 8% of people in the world have blue eyes. Fascinating stuff. What you're talking about there is really interesting. So, we have had a problem in Ireland in that archaeology is a discipline. Mythology and medieval studies and Middle and Old Irish is a different discipline. And there's a multiplicity of disciplines within that broad discipline. And of course, everybody specialises. I'm an archaeologist specialising in, for instance, grooved ware pottery. I'm an archaeologist specialising blah, blah, blah. And never the twain shall meet. So,
I was just talking earlier about whether I was on the spectrum or whether Blind Boy now is talking on the spectrum. But academics were all on the spectrum, and us who are doing this work, we're all these people who focus on one thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I'm definitely on the spectrum. Definitely.
I'd say the room. We're West Cork. There's no one who isn't in West Cork.
But no, this is it goes to the heart of something, which is the detachment of mythology from academic study. It's, if you go back to the early, I'm just thinking of the Louth archaeological journals, in the early 1900s, 1904 I think the first one was published, you'll see in the contents that it's an equal mixture of historical and archaeological material and myth and folklore. At some point in the 20th century we decided, oh no, we shouldn't put those two things in together, we definitely shouldn't. And they became separated. Now they're coming back together again, but they're coming back together in a surprise way, because the science, various disciplines are teaching us things that are destroying our worldview. So I'm just going to try and link this up for you. So Manchán was talking about the fact that there were basically 3 diverse peoples in Ireland in prehistory. There were people who arrived at the end of the Ice Age. We call those the hunter-gatherers. Mesolithic, Middle Stone Age. Paleolithic is Old Stone Age, but most of the evidence is washed away and scoured away by the ice. Mesolithic, they're different genetically to the farmers who come from Turkey, gradually, probably arriving into Ireland from France, oui monsieur, and coming around to the west of Ireland, and they die out or are killed by, or a combination of things. The Beaker folk, 2400 BC approximately, we have this totally new arrival. Where is their origin, by the way? Ukraine. The Pontic steppe, the Eurasian steppe, north of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, areas in the south of Ukraine and parts of Russia. And geneticists have now shown that the majority of the modern Irish population are descended from that arrival of people. Which, I'm sorry, I'm just going to make a little bit of a joke. All of those people who arrive at Newgrange and the Hill of Tara and Loughcrew and all those places and go, oh, I'm here to honour my ancestors. Well, they're highly unlikely to be your genetic ancestors because we killed them off or they died off somewhere.
So was it a key thing? Like we learned because of the war, the Ukraine is the breadbasket of the world. But didn't those Beaker people bring grain growing to Ireland? No, was it not them abroad?
No, the previous people. No, the Neolithic people brought grain.
Yeah, but they brought mainly cattle. The Bronze Age had more sophisticated grain growing techniques.
Oh, probably, yeah.
But go on, okay, so it's not.
But I'm not entirely clear on that point. Okay. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? So until about 5 years ago, one of the sacred, shall we say, what is it called when people believe in
shibboleths, is it?
An idea? A dogma, yes, that's a good word. The dogma was that the Irish language arrived in the Iron Age with the Celts. Yeah, the Celts. Aren't they brilliant? They were the first ones, by the way, who were deemed to be civilized. Because everything that came before that is not really civilized. It's muck savage stuff, throwing stones together and honouring sun gods and, sun gods copulating with the earth to produce a harvest and all that nonsense. Right? And then all of a sudden you have this idea that the Celts, they were the first ones to be, civilized. And of course, and what has happened in the last 5 years? The geneticists have blown that completely out of the water. Think torpedo and think submarine sinking fast to the bottom of the ocean. Why? Because the geneticists have said, a small but important point, there was no major arrival of people in the Iron Age. The last major arrival of people in Ireland, if you discount the Anglo-Normans and you discount the Vikings, the last major arrival of people into Ireland is the Beaker folk in 2400 BC. And the geneticists are arguing with the linguists, saying, so Irish probably bedded down in the Bronze Age. Now, the reason that's important to what Manchán has asked is this. Because scholars in particular have said, there's too much of a difference and too many changes of people and culture for a story, for instance, about the light shining into Newgrange, for that to survive across 5,000 years. So that has always been considered to be nonsense, the idea that that could survive. But there's a problem with that. Newgrange was blocked up for 4,000 years until 1699. And only when O'Kelly restored the roof box in 1967 could we finally see the sun in the chamber of Newgrange again after 4,000 years. And yet loads of people had told O'Kelly, do you know the sun shines in there and lights up the triple spiral in the chamber once a year? How did they know that? Anyway, so you have that, right? But even if it wasn't like a change of people, right, you could maybe accept that. But my argument to that, and it might be a bit childish and facile, I'll admit, is, well, you know the story of Jesus of Nazareth and Bethlehem and all that. How do you know that? What language was that originally told in? What language was it written down in? Greek. Do you know Greek? No, you don't know Greek. What language do you speak? English. It's not impossible for a story to survive across different peoples, different cultures, and different languages. Of course it's not. But what we're closer to now is the reality that we are descended from the Bronze Age people, and they interacted with the people who built Newgrange. That's how the story survived. It's a much simpler explanation for it.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm sure I meant to put a question in there, but I've exhausted my energy in that, and I'm conscious that I should let you speak.
No, that's fascinating. And again, I just know in Aboriginal culture, cultures are having the confidence now to relook at mythology and realise that there could be climate information there could be glacial information, there could even be geological information there. And the beauty, well, I suppose the far-fetched example I said is the fact that they were talking about Ireland being as high as Everest in that story. Like, that's unlikely, but it's a lovely, or the fact that the Cailleach, it's always said that the Cailleach she is, when she was young, Ur vi misha og vi unfarige in a knoch quilte, when I was young, the ocean was this wooded hill. Basically, she's saying she's standing in Beara looking out west and saying that ocean was once a hilly landscape. And as we know, pre-Pangaea, it was, at the time Pangaea, when the continents were together before they separated apart. So there's these lovely ideas that actually myth can go right back to geological times. That's never going to be proved, except that in Australia, the two disciplines, anthropology and mythology, were absolutely apart and are still apart. You won't find any university where you're allowed to study both at the same time. And yet, because of the internet and people at home, reading all these things, thinking, wait there, and you wouldn't dare say this within academia. And you've talked before on your podcast, on your YouTube, archaeologists come to you and say they wish that they respect what you're saying. They wish they could say it in public, but they daren't. Because any field of academia moves slowly.
Have you been listening to my phone calls? I have had a couple of those conversations, yeah.
And so it's great. The amateurs, like me or you, can get away with things. And what's really happening in Australia, and the Aboriginal people are being blown away because finally someone is saying, we always told you this, that we know, like we knew information. Let's say in West Australia, you go out there, we knew what was happening under the ground, under the land, because we remember back, well, just, whenever 3,000 years ago before water shifted, but we remember 10,000, they remember 65,000 years back. So there's actually proof that's being accepted by them. And so, and I know the Jerry Saddleback and some of the elders I've just been with in Canada were saying the same. Like they said we came. They say, people would say we came from Asia. We came across whatever, is that the Bering Strait or the top of it? And they said, we know that wasn't true because our people said we've always been here. And the anthropologist and the archaeologist says we never had horses. We know we had horses because it's said in our stories, and our stories can't be wrong. And again, if I'd explain to you why their stories can't be wrong, why they know it, they're so profound. But they said, and of course, like 5 years ago, archaeologists found horse bones, and they came to us very excited. They said, Jerry Saddleback said to me, and Lewis and Lana Whiskey Jack, and they said, we know it's in our stories. Our stories can't be wrong, and the reason their stories can't be wrong is because Jerry Saddleback is of the Plains Cree people. He's in Alberta, Edmonton. He's like the key man of the ceremonial language and the mythology. He first was able to tell the 4-day story, and now he can tell the 40-day story of his people, or the 3-month story. The reason he goes out to tell his story on a piece of land, and he needs to first recreate the landscape that he'll tell his story in, because they thought that people might have to shift because of climate change or lack of animals, or then what happened in the white people coming in. So they needed a story. The stories are bedded in the land. Listen to the land speak, just like the Din Shanachas. All the stories in Ireland are connected to place. So you only can tell the story in the landscape. And so because he could move landscape, you have to recreate the landscape. You set up a camp. You live there for 3 months. You set up every mountain, every river in the camp, and you tell the story for the 3 months. And every story is told with a direction of the wind, a direction of the sun, a direction of the river, a direction of the stone, a body movement. You cannot get it wrong because you can't tell the story without looking at the right stone, without the wind being in the right way, but then the sun without the right way. So if one thing goes wrong, the whole thing crumbles. So you're guaranteed it's locked. It's this almost matrix, Rubik's Cube, locked into the right position, and the information is traversed. And of course there's long apprenticeships, just like there was long apprenticeships in Ireland, to make sure it wasn't Dúirt ban lum go Nort ban lay. It wasn't Chinese whispers. It was a way of encoding the story in the landscape. So when you're in the landscape, it's song lines basically. You walk through the landscape and you tell the story. No better example than Sheep's Head, than Beara, than all around here, where every piece of field of rock has the story encoded.
Yeah, I love that. And your mention of the Dunshanachus reminds me of the fact that this is material that is found in medieval manuscripts written by mostly ecclesiastical scribes, but not all of them churchmen in the Middle Ages. And Dunshanachus material is found in 12 or 14 manuscripts. So it's clearly very, very important. But just to talk about the linking up of story, and by the way, we will just read the room when we're aware that people are beginning to sort of flag,
half. And did we start? So have we done an hour now? Because we should ask questions as well.
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll probably just go on for another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll take questions and maybe comments from the floor if that's okay. But just to link up what you were saying there. So I have a theory, and all it is a theory, but just bear with me for a second. We have the Tuatha De Danann, who are very specifically associated with the Neolithic monuments of the Boyne Valley. The Dagda built Newgrange. He lived in there, etc., etc. We have goddesses associated with Nouth. We have a story about Douth that looks like a medieval story, but actually it's got incest in it, and we've already proven that incest is a theme in the science, in the DNA. My theory is this, that Amergin and the Milesians is a mythologizing, as it were, of the Bronze Age arrival. They encounter the Tuatha De Danann, who are the gods, but who probably were originally humans and who were later, is the word euhemerized, made gods, or is that the opposite? When you make a god immortal, I can't remember. But they're later made into gods. And so the Milesians come and defeat the Tuatha De Danann. The Tuatha De Danann go into their she-mounds, where, by the way, they can constantly re-emerge into this world, which, when we're on the theme of Samhain and the veil being thin, the whole discussion on social media about the veil and how far back that idea goes, and it's an interesting discussion, multifaceted discussion. But what about the possibility that, so if you go back 100 years or 200 years and you ask an average Irish peasant, because we were all peasants, None of us could read or write until the second half of the 20th century, really. Not in English anyway. And you ask a person, what are the folkloric or mythological origins of the Irish? And they'll say, we're descended from the Gael. The Gael being another word for the Milesians. What if the mythology is merely reflecting the reality, that there was a total new people who arrived, so that culture that arrived at the threshold of the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, we call them the beaker folk because they make a particular type of pot called a beaker. They came from the Pontic Steppe, but they arrived via Iberia. And the Milesians come from Spain. So my theory is that this is just a mythologizing of what really happened. What if now, and it looks like it is happening, the science is basically saying, if you accept the argument or the notion that Amergin and the Milesians are a mythological version, as it were, of this arrival, and the Danans were a sort of mythologized version of the people who actually did build Newgrange, then the beliefs and the myths were true all along. And then, as I say, you're back to this whole idea of, well, we know that there's a threshold there. There's a time period where there's a crossover at the end of the Neolithic and the beginning of the Bronze Age, where these two cultures actually did mingle. And what exactly happened between them, we don't know. Did, for instance, the beaker folk bring some sort of pathogen which they were immune to, but the Neolithic farmers weren't immune to? Did they fight to the death? Did they kill the men and marry the women? All of those discussions arise. And the simple fact is we can't say for sure, because all of the Neolithic remains that we have in tombs are very fragmented. A lot of them are cremated, and it's very difficult to build a picture as to how these people died, I've gone on far too long, but we're cutting out basically this idea of, well, there's too many different peoples between now and the Neolithic for that to be the case, And we're reintroducing the idea of, well, actually our stories could be truly very ancient.
Yeah. And I'll just make one comment, then we will throw it over. Just that Grace Wells, the poet from County Clare, makes the lovely point, as you said. So it's the Milesians and it's Mil d'España, they're called. So the man who came from Spain. It's very clear. And we know that our answer, the archaeologists, anthropologists, will be, we arrived by boat up the Spanish-French coast. The people who came before, the Tuatha Danann. Grace Wells says Tuatha often they're called, or Danann. Annan gets complicated because it's either the Indian, the Vedic goddess An, or our European Celtic god. But Tuatha, the people of the goddess. So basically it's the people of God, the goddess, and then along come these new settlers from Spain. They could be very similar to them, but just with a slightly new technology or a new bit of culture. So it really ties really beautifully in, I think, as you say, the myth happens with what the anthropologists agree with. I don't know, I mean, what you said there was fascinating. Is there a brief thing you could say about the veil? I didn't know, is there something online are people claiming that the idea of a veil, a threshold between other worlds, is a new thing or is an older thing?
Well, the discussion as I've seen it, which involves some scholars and sort of people interested in these things, suggests that the idea of a thinning veil is relatively modern. But we know that there's a thing called the Feth Feda, which is a mist of concealment. I always liken it to the cloak of invisibility in Harry Potter. That when the Danans emerge from the Sidhe, they can choose whether to be seen or not. And there's a depiction. It's described as a cloak, actually a cloak made by Manannán for Manannán MacLear for the Danans. So they can emerge and be seen if they want. Aengus apparently emerges from Sheedinbroga or Newgrange once in a while to be seen on this earth, according to, I think, Lady Gregory. Or they can wear the cloak of concealment and not be seen. But the discussion was around the whole idea of the thinning veil, that has become maybe a little bit of a cliched idea, and by extension, the fact that it is claimed that Halloween as a celebration originated in Ireland. And I don't think that's true, to be honest.
I mean, Púcín is an ancient word, and Púcín means a supernatural covering that allows otherworldly beings appear invisible in this world. It's one of the meanings. Or, what's that word? The other one, which is cultufí vrotchi, cloaked under a fairy mantle and thus made invisible. It's like it's in the language, and as you're claiming, that language could go a lot further back than 2,000 years. But the whole idea of thin places and the John O'Donoghue and the thinning veil, if you want to say that's a Robert Graves emphasis of a 19th century, I'd go along with that. But the idea of beings being able to traverse, it's full, all of Samhain, all the mythology, it's about the traversing beings. Anyway, Questions? Should we ask for?
Yeah, I'm very happy. Just to very quickly address something you said much earlier on, which was to do with, you mentioned Robert Graves there. Myth can be subject to fresh interpretations in every age.
And can be manipulated in the wrong way as well.
Well, of course, that's where you have to be careful. So I suppose that's one of the things that we're doing, is putting a fresh lens on it all. And on the Cailleach thing, when you talked about Beara there, that's almost like an exact carbon copy of a poem recorded by Dean Swift, Jonathan Swift, in the 18th century, which was, I am the Collie Vera, it's Loch Crew, I am the Collie Vera, many wonders have I seen seen Carnbawn a lake, though 'tis now a mountain green. And what she's saying is, Carnbawn, which is the westernmost hill of Loch Crew with the cairns, some of the cairns on it, she says, I remember when that was at the bottom of a lake, and now it's on the top of a mountain. So similar sort of idea.
And is the stones, is it the glacial formation, the geological formation, something that would have been on the bottom of a lake?
Well, if you look on Mullameen, because I remember being shown fossils on the top of Mullameen Hill, which is the next hill over in Westmeath, that, you know, if you knew your fossils, that you'd be able to say, well, these are actually marine fossils. So maybe people made that connection. And if you're interested in the Cailleach, a brilliant book, and really the single best book about the Cailleach is Gearóid Ó Cruaileach's The Book of the Cailleach, which is a wonderful erudite study, but also very mind-open. Wonderful work of scholarship, but by a person with a very open mind and open to all sorts of ideas and interpretations. Folks, it's been such an honour. For me personally, wonderful to have such a lovely discussion with Manchán. Hopefully the second of many. I was going to say the first of many, but it's not the first. And don't forget, as I said earlier, that a video of this will be available online. So please, if you think that there's anybody who might be interested in watching it, it will be on Mythical Ireland social media in a couple of weeks' time. We have to do the commercial stuff. Both of us have our books on a table in the corner, and we would be very glad to offload signed copies of those onto you in the corner afterwards. Thank you very much.